Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Indycar on the, the 2nd of April today. Now, I'm making an apology today because I think one of my broadcasts yesterday caused a great deal of concern, particularly amongst older members of Scottish society who felt like I was having a go at pensioners and trying to blame them for taking money off the young people of today. Well, actually, that's my fault for not communicating very well yesterday. I was trying to put across the idea that we need to reconsider how pensions are paid, not the fact that we shouldn't pay the pensions, but where the money comes from. Most of us, I'm talking about my generation and the generation before, were told by the British government that when we paid our national insurance stamps, that over the course of our working lives, that money is put into a pension pot which is invested presumably and grows, and the surpluses and the pension pot at the end of your working life is used to pay your pension. That was a lie. It doesn't work that way, because the money that's paid into national insurance fills up a pot which, when it overflows and surpluses are created, instead of reinvesting those or building the fund even larger, they simply skim off the top whatever is surplus and spend it on repaying the debt. And you can actually fact check that. The British government is spending national insurance payments on repayments of debt at the moment. And that money that you've paid in all of your working life, which you are entitled to as your pension, is not coming from that pension pot. That pension pot is raided constantly by government. Gordon Brown did it, the Tories are doing it, and in actual fact they're now making it that the taxes paid by the workers of today, the people who are actually currently employed, are going largely into general taxation to help pay for the benefits that you receive. Now, the benefits are pensions. Primarily the biggest benefit payments in the UK are pensions. That forms at least 60% of all benefits paid out, and everybody is entitled to that. My argument is not about the fact that you shouldn't get your pension or that you haven't paid into it and you don't deserve it. What I'm saying to you is that the government has been lying to you about where the pension money is coming from. It's now coming from general taxation, because they're spending the surpluses that you've paid in on bringing down government debt. So the government is borrowing money and taxing the people who are working to provide your pension. That's not your fault, not anybody's fault. That's the fault of government. So my post yesterday, my supplementary post yesterday, was not that we should in some way punish pensioners or stop them getting their pensions or say that they've done anything wrong, but to completely reconfigure the model of pensions and completely reconfigure the economy so that people's pensions are paid by the pot of money that they pay into and not being used to pay down debts. So in the first instance, the new Scottish economy must not borrow money unless it can repay it within about a year. So in other words, I'm proposing that the new Scottish economy does not run on constant borrowing, which is the way the UK economy works. In the UK economy, tax money is paid in, they add up what they've got, and then they destroy that money. And then they borrow the same amount again, plus whatever they need to repay the debts that they've already run up, plus whatever they need to cope with inflation. And so the British economy is always borrowing more money every time they announce a budget, because that's the way the economy in the UK is managed. It's managed by using a system of collecting taxes, and whatever the shortfall is, they borrow it as well. So they borrow what they need. Tax money is literally wiped off the books as soon as it comes in. It just disappears. As soon as they've added it up, they then destroy that money in the bank account of the United Kingdom and borrow from a general bank the same amount of money again, plus whatever they actually need on top of that to meet the requirements for the following year and the debt repayments and the deficit of the previous years. So it's a mess. The British economy is a complete debt-ridden mess, and it always has been. My proposal yesterday was that we scrap that system completely and we change the entire economic model for Scotland into one where the 1% who currently hold all the wealth stop getting all the wealth. When people invest in a business, if you set up a business and you borrow money from investors to set up the business, those investors, in my opinion, should be paid a percentage back on their investment. But after that, that should end. So as soon as they get back their money with the interest on it, then their involvement in that company should stop at that point. And the people who then are working in the company should then become its shareholders, so that they are the ones who, if the company is successful and makes profits, they are the ones who get the benefit. They get a share of that, a cooperative, if you like, or a profit-sharing arrangement. And if every company was configured that way, then the wealth which would normally be sucked away to the 1% and hoarded by them and kept out of circulation would flow into every part of the local economy, because the people taking home larger salaries would pay more taxes. Remember, more taxation is good. They'd pay more in national insurance, again, good for pensions. And the remaining high levels of additional cash that are still in their bank accounts can be spent in the local economy on the things that local economies provide: shops, restaurants, pubs, and so on, leisure facilities, experience days out, tourism, and so on. And this is the way an economy really should work. The money should not be getting hoovered away and hoarded by a very tiny minority of the population who keep that money out of circulation, hoarded only for themselves. And one person can only use a very tiny proportion of the millions that they've stashed away. Okay, they can reinvest it in other things, which is up to them. But at the same time, the way investment works in the UK is all wrong. It's all basically aimed at keeping the wealthy wealthy and making sure that there's never too many wealthy people, so that they become more wealthy, the ones who are already there. So that system, I think, needs to change. And that's what I was trying to say yesterday. So if I've upset a lot of my older audience, I apologise, because I wasn't intending to have a go at you, and I wasn't intending to make out that you were somehow responsible for taking money off the working young people. You're not. It was the British government that was responsible for that, and they still are. But I do stand by my original comments about population. Now, you might be interested to know that the population in the West generally is already falling, and it's falling because women in the West are choosing to have children later, and they're choosing to have fewer children. And this is because Western women, as we know, have more choices than those who live in, shall we say, more old-fashioned places where women are not regarded as equals. But Western women can choose when they have children. They can choose not to have children. They can choose to marry or not marry. They can choose to work or not work. They can choose to do a variety of things, and they are choosing. And because the roles of women are now changing, women themselves are limiting the number of children they have, and they're having them later in life. Now, what that means is that the birth rate is falling naturally. It's almost like a checks and balance system which accidentally has occurred. But the point is that the population is falling. It's stabilising and then declining slowly. So what I'm trying to say to you here is that, do we really need to import more people to keep our economy going? Or do we just need to reconfigure the economy to work better for the slightly smaller population we have? Remember, the size of the population we have is directly related to the amount of pollution that population creates. So if we're burning a lot of fuel, for example, in the winter because we have a huge population all huddled in their houses through the winter, the smaller the population is, the less fuel we burn and the less noxious fumes go into the air, the less greenhouse gases, and the less pollution and the less heat. So, generally speaking, a slightly dwindling or stabilised dwindling population is not a bad thing. What we need to look at is how we live better with less energy use. And that means you need an economy which is based largely on a balance of considerations, not just profit, which it is at the moment. Our economy is based on profit, it's based on mass production and mass consumption and mass waste. And we need to change all of that. We need to stop wasting things, and we need to produce goods which last a long time, that are of high quality and are recycled at the end of their lives into new things. If we don't do this, then we will wreck the rest of the planet. Now, it brings me to the next part of my show today, which is that Yesterday's feeds, I noticed, were infected with large numbers of Brexit voters, from England mainly. I didn't see any from Scotland. But I was shocked to discover in the one conversation with a particular woman from England that she thought that Scotland had voted to leave the European Union. She had no idea that Scotland had voted entirely in every constituency to remain in the European Union. She was so ignorant, she didn't even know how Scotland voted. And if this is an indication of the level of political awareness in England, then it shows you how well the propaganda in England is working. The propagandists for Brexit are getting their own way on the BBC, they're getting their own way on ITV and Channel 4, and the people of England are now convinced that there's a massive majority all across the UK for leaving the EU when there actually isn't. And they don't seem to be able to understand why Scottish MPs in Westminster are arguing against Brexit. It seems to not compute. They do not understand why there is that dissonance. And it's simply because what the news is that's appearing in the English press is different from what we get here. It's always been different. There's always been, Scotland has its own programmes. Scotland has its own version of English newspapers which have totally different headlines about the same stories. I'll give you an indication of something else that occurred yesterday. You might remember I mentioned that, I think it was on Scotland at 7 last week, that Scotland was producing far more renewable energy than ever before. That had shot up by about, I think it was 18%. I'll check my figures later. But what we haven't been told is how much of our surplus energy that's exported is actually going to England. And the figures are quite amazing. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I was amazed at just how much we're exporting to England. English energy that's imported into Scotland is tiny by comparison. Scotland is exporting between 6 and 7 times as much electricity to England as it receives from the English grid. We're talking about tens of thousands of kilowatt hours, megawatt hours, huge quantities of electricity flowing across the border into England and not seen in the figures that are being reported. We saw figures, I think yesterday, which said something like 53% of surplus energy that Scotland was producing was going to England. That wasn't actually true. It was much, much more than that. And the real figures are somewhere between 6 and 7 times as much energy flows south as flows north. Now that shows you that England is a massive net importer of Scottish electricity, and Scotland's primary electricity export market is England, something which English voters do not know. They think that all their electricity comes from England. They do not know that a lot of it is coming from surplus wind and tidal energy from Scotland. So there are a lot of lies being told to English people about things that are just simply not true. And as well as that, I noticed that the people who have been infecting the posts, the ones who are Brexiteers, are also climate chaos deniers. They deny climate change is happening. They think it's some kind of huge conspiracy against them by some kind of, I don't know, Illuminati who are trying to confuse the electorate into believing that there's a climate crisis when there isn't one. There is one. The whole globe is warming up. The facts are there. NASA is involved in it. Russians, the Chinese, every country in the world is monitoring global temperatures. Every scientist in the world, every climatologist, even geologists are looking at it as well, because everything that adds heat to the planet's atmosphere, to the planet's oceans, is vital. We know the oceans are heating up. We know the atmosphere is heating up. It's been going on for decades. And we know that although there is a warming cycle in nature, we have accelerated it hundreds of times faster than it should be going. And we've done that by our own actions, by burning our way through trillions of tons of oil and gas and filling the atmosphere with carbon dioxide and other heavy gases like methane. Remember, methane, which we don't talk about, comes from animal farts. It comes from ourselves, it comes from domesticated animals like cattle. And because of our obsession with eating beef and factory farming, humongous amounts of methane are released into the atmosphere every single year. And methane is hundreds of times worse for trapping atmospheric heat than carbon dioxide is. So there are a lot of lies being told to people generally, but the lies are not that climate chaos is a lie. The lie is that climate chaos is actually true and people don't believe it. Donald Trump is one of the biggest climate change deniers out there, and he has vested interests in coal mining, oil production, chemical production, and all kinds of harmful, polluting industries that he is backing, that he is being bribed by, presumably, and lobbied by constantly to represent. So what I wanted to say to you today basically is that Scotland is in a fantastic position economically at the moment to remodel its economy. England is going to need our power for decades to come after it Brexits, because it doesn't create enough electrical power to cope with the spikes in demand that it currently experiences. Remember, England has something like 10 times our population and only about a third more of landmass than we have. So England has a huge problem with energy consumption. It needs more and more energy constantly. And because its population continues to rise, because it attracts immigrants from all over the world to its supposed economic miracle in London, it's always going to need power. And Scotland's in the perfect position to supply it. So when we do leave the UK, we will have a terrific energy market in England. But remember, we're also going to have a terrific energy market in Ireland, in Iceland, in Denmark, in Europe in general, and we'll be connected to all of those as well. So we can keep on expanding our energy production, our natural energy production, utilising all of the seas around the country and all of the coastal inlets, all of the tidal streams. We have a massive amount of energy to farm and to exploit. Probably 2 or 3 times as much energy as Scotland could ever actually use itself, which is going to put us in a terrific position to decarbonise. In a few years' time, I guess by about the 2030s, Scotland will be in position to be able to switch off burning fossil fuels completely. And I mean things like natural gas for your central heating. But, and this is the big but, in order to produce that power cheaply enough to replace gas and not cost any more than gas, we would need to nationalise our power production, because at the moment there's too much profit being taken out by the big 6 energy companies who produce energy and then charge far more for it than it actually costs to produce. And in doing so, they put the cost of heating your home up to thousands of pounds a year. What I would like to see in the 2030s is the energy sector being invested in massively by the Scottish Investment Bank, and to nationalise the energy agency which deals with all of that power. So we have an energy board. That way we can switch off North Sea gas and utilise it for other things, like turning it into plastics and polymers, instead of burning it uselessly and filling the atmosphere with yet more carbon dioxide. We can heat our homes with energy produced from the wind. Electric heating isn't always as efficient as gas, and until recently it's been too expensive really for most of us to afford. But if you're overproducing energy, then the best way to store it is actually as heat. And in the case of Scotland in the wintertime, that's exactly what you would want to do. But imagine being able to heat the whole of Scotland without burning a single cubic metre of gas. It would be fantastic. We could have a completely clean country which pours out no CO2 whatsoever. And with that amount of excess power, every vehicle on the road could be electric, and there'll be enough power to supply them. And this is my point. I was trying to make the point that we need a green environmental economy, and to do that we need to make some hard choices. We also need to stop thinking that that the population explosion is a necessary evil. It's not. Our population could stabilise, and it already has pretty much stabilised, and it's declined slightly, and it's declining very slowly. But an influx of people from abroad will usually stabilise that, and I think Scotland is at that kind of point at the moment. So what I want to see, and I think what we all want to see when Scotland is independent, is for us to look hard at these topics, not regard them as a taboo, not continue with business as usual. If anything, the SNP is a little bit guilty of trying to placate the capitalists amongst us and say, you know, we're not going to change things terribly much when we're independent. But I think when we are independent, we are going to have to bite the bullet and say, yes, we do need to change things. But what we will do is we will take the capitalists with us. Those investors who would be worried about not making their millions anymore, they'll still be able to make money under a new system. But the new system is just going to be different. And the big difference for those wealthy individuals is that they're not going to be alone anymore. They're not going to be quite as wealthy, but they're still going to be very comfortable. But what will be different is that the workers who work for the companies that they own will also be a bit wealthier. So it's a very slight rebalancing, but it means that there is more money in the economy generally. So those capitalists who worried about not making as much money can invest more in the local economy, in buying smaller businesses. There are always paybacks from doing changes like this. We're just planning to shift the emphasis away from the 1% and back to the 90% to try and rebalance the economy a little bit and to consider the whole environment in all the planning that we do. It's not just about stopping the production of CO2. We have to stop the production of throwaway plastics and other throwaway items. We need to build massive recycling industries which take those waste products and turn them into useful things. One of those useful things I mentioned a few weeks ago is plastic tarmac. Plastic tarmac will revolutionise Scottish road building because it doesn't crack in the wintertime. It doesn't break up and form potholes. It lasts, if it's done right, should last hundreds of years. That would allow us to re-tarmac the entire nation. Thousands or millions of miles of roads could be resurfaced using this waste material. We could get rid of it and turn it into something useful. And that's all I've been saying really for the last few days, is that people need to stop thinking the same old way. If Scotland's going to become a new country, it needs to have new thinking and it needs to lead from the front, not be following the Tory ideology of austerity like it's done with the Growth Commission. We don't want a Growth Commission. We want a sustainable economic commission, something which looks at the far future and plans not just for 5 years ahead, but plans for the next 500 years ahead. The future of our descendants is important. And remember that we're going to live longer. And if you're going to live till you're about 100, then the results of what we decide today, we will experience them as old people. And wouldn't it be nice when you're sitting in your care home talking to your younger relatives, your great-grandchildren or your great-great-grandchildren, to be able to say to them, yeah, I'm proud of what we did back then, because it's enabled you guys to have a better life, the life that you've got now. And your grandchildren will thank you for what you're doing, because you'll be able to, and also you'll be able to join in the celebrations of that success later on, because you're going to live longer. This is the whole point. If we're going to live longer, then we want to experience some of the benefits of the steps that we take now. And if we do them now, we will get to experience that. We'll get to see how our grandchildren grow up in a better country. And that's what I want. I know that's what everybody else wants. And I think we just have to accept we have to do things differently now. Pensions will continue to be paid. But interestingly, if we stay in the European Union and we are independent, everybody's pension is going to more than double, because the European Union has introduced a new directive which standardises the pensions across the European Union, so there is a more equal spread of money for every pensioner. And so I think in the longer term, pensions are going to be not only safe, but they're going to be higher, and people will be better off when Scotland leaves the United Kingdom. That's about it for today. I know there's an awful lot of information in this broadcast, but again, I wanted to reiterate an apology to my older viewers, because I think I gave you the wrong impression the other day that I was somehow blaming you for taking money from the young. I'm not really. It's just the way the system is designed. is skewed heavily towards paying debts with your pension money and forcing the younger workers. They're basically not forcing them, but actually just using their tax money to pay your pension. That's not your fault as a pensioner, and it's not the workers' fault as workers. They don't have any choice, neither do you. The government is the one that pays the pensions, and when Scotland does leave the UK, the Scottish government will be paying the pensions, and we will be able to do things differently. And that's really all I was trying to say the other day, that we need to look at other ways of doing things so that pensioners are supported properly, but also so that pensioners are given the opportunity to continue working, or to help train the next generation, or to create new businesses and new ideas and help young people to develop them into new green industries. There's no reason why people have to stop working at 65 or 68 just because we're told that's when you can claim your pension. You could continue to work long after you start claiming your pension. You could even continue to be employed and not take your pension if you wanted. Or you could give some of your pension to somebody else, or you could transfer it to a family member who needs it more than you. We need to make these things much more flexible. And that was my point yesterday, was really we need to start thinking differently. We've been stuck with a system that doesn't work anymore, that was designed for a different age by a group of people towards the end of a war when the country was on its knees and they wanted to rebuild and give people some hope and some stability. And it worked for a long time. But now we've come to a period of great instability again, and we're at the point where we need to make a new decision about how we support people in their retirement. Okay, I'm gone. I'll talk to you all later. But again, I'm sorry to people who were upset by what I said yesterday. But when you're thinking radical thoughts, don't be afraid to rattle a cage a little bit and think outside of the box. Nobody's suggesting that anybody is at fault here. Just that the system isn't working properly and the government is to blame for ballsing it all up as usual. So I'll see you all tomorrow, and we'll keep an eye on what happens next with Brexit. But actually, it's been quite nice today to be not talking about Brexit for a change. So I'll see you all later. Bye bye for now.